Looks a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, it is for sure. But yeah, interesting work, carrying forward a lot of work that you have done for years.
Thank you. And then, do you still go to the office or you can work from home?
I'm in office. It's voluntary, but it's better to work from office. I mean, the situation is, it's very strange. And Carsten, I'm sure you have noted that there is a surge in Germany as well, with so many people getting infected, but the hospitalization rate is declining, which is very interesting. That more number of people getting infected, but not going to the hospital. It shows that perhaps the impact of vaccination is taking effect.
Good.
Carsten, you are muted.
I think at the moment we only have people who are not vaccinated who have to go to hospital. If you look at the ICU wards, I saw a graph which is 99.9% not vaccinated people.
Yeah, exactly. Same everywhere. I got my booster just over the weekend and feel safe now.
Yeah, that's the third dose, right?
Yeah.
Even I got mine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, shall we start? It's 2:02.
Yeah, I think we should.
I think so. And participants will join. I think the admin will assign them the respective breakout room and will be joining soon. So we'll start. Good afternoon, good morning to one and all. As we all know about this frequency of disasters year by year is increasing. It is pertinent to explore ways to build resilience. Urbanization too is affecting the inherent capacity of natural resources of peri-urban areas to deal with the disasters, thereby affecting the resilience. So there is tremendous pressure on already scarce resources such as land and water. So this session therefore looks into various aspects of reducing risk of disasters. So we have three renowned speakers with us who will give us different perspective of building resilience to disasters in peri-urban areas. And we have eminent discussant with us who will take it forward. So we'll have, after a small talk of chair, we'll have these four presentations and followed by the discussion of around 20 minutes. So each speaker will have 12 minutes of time to speak, either through a presentation or they can give their talk. I will hand over the session to chair, but before that, I will introduce him briefly. So, Shri G. Padmanabhan has joined UNDP in 1992 and has been handling disaster management portfolio of UNDP India since 1995. He took early retirement from UNDP in December 2017 as the head of the disaster management portfolio. He was a leader of the team in UNDP involved in implementing the Government of India UNDP Disaster Risk Management Program. Shri Padmanabhan has been providing advice to governments of countries in the Asia region and worked for 1 year in the northern Iraq as assistant director of a rehabilitation project of UNDP. He worked very closely with MHA, NDMA, and many state governments as well as NGO. Post-retirement, he has been working on advisory positions with various institutions and freelance work with various agencies, including UN on disaster risk reduction. We welcome you, sir, for chairing this session on disaster and resilience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rima. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to chair the session. Am I audible? And then can you all see me?
Yes, you are
Yes, sir.
audible,
Yeah.
and we can see you also.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, this is an important topic, and then I really want to congratulate SPA Bhopal and then other institutions involved in it for putting together so many people together to deliberate on this. And then let's hope at the end of it, we'll be able to come up with some meaningful recommendations or suggestions on the way forward. I mean, I don't have to tell you the importance of urban centers and then the interaction it has with the neighboring peri-urban areas. This is well understood, and then they have been pursuing a symbiotic relationship, and now things are slowly changing. And then while the relationship is still there, and then we do have a lot of challenges in front of us. Now, many of the urban centers are also becoming highly congested, and then there is little space within it for further development. So the immediate reaction is to eat away the space that's available in the surrounding areas, mainly the peri-urban areas. So that's putting a lot of pressure on these peri-urban areas, even if they were self-sustainable. The external forces that are applying on these areas are slowly making it unsustainable. Now, we are all familiar from a disaster point of view. The damages and then vulnerabilities have already been created within the urban area, mainly because of haphazard, unplanned development and then inadequate infrastructure, and also unsafe horizontal and vertical development. As space became a challenge, there is a tendency to grow vertical, and then that quite often is not really the safe development that we've seen. So that sort of increases the vulnerability. The second thing is this expansion into the peri-urban areas is also increasing the vulnerabilities in those areas. The poor and the unorganized sector are being pushed further to the margins, and then their vulnerability is also increasing. So we have a physical vulnerability which is being developed, and then a socioeconomic vulnerability which is developing. Now, the third factor is the environment vulnerability. As more and more green spaces are being converted into or other physical structures, and then the water bodies, which very rarely planners understand the importance of it, and they think it's a waste of land and then revenue. So there is a tendency to build structures over it, and then the real estate business is very powerful to promote that kind of development. In the process, we are losing the sponges which are there, which would absorb any excess water, and then which would be made available during a dry period. So that is vanishing. And then, as we all know, the climate change is also having its impact on the urban areas. And then there's a lot of discussion at the national and international levels, which has actually created an understanding that we need to do or invest more in mitigation and adaptation measures in the whole urban setting. Now, but what is happening is that apart from some small urban pockets where there is a good understanding of the impact of these kind of changes that they can expect, the larger community, such as all the developmental actors and then the communities also, are unaware of the forces that work and then what they can do. So all these good intentions and discussions are translating into policy documents with very little capacity to implement this on the ground. Now, another challenge we have is many of the cities which are already highly congested are also being shifted to the peri-urban areas. I read yesterday somewhere that The Jakarta is also going to be shifted outside to some other city, and then there are massive investment being pumped into to make sure that this happens quickly within 24 or something. 2024, I think they want to do that. Now, if you look at the future, about 90% of the future urbanization apparently is going to be, over the next 3 decades, is going to be in Asia and Africa. Now, according to a World Bank report, about half of the urbanization growth is mainly attributed to rural-urban migration and reclassification. In India, apparently that figure is about 35% due to migration. So essentially what I want to say is that the peri-urban areas are being swallowed into the larger urban area, and the problems within the urban area now are also being pushed into the peri-urban areas. So soon we're going to see such a phenomena that the entire area is going to be highly vulnerable to disasters, and then putting extreme pressure on the existing resources, natural and then other resources that are available in the peri-urban areas. So unless this future development in the peri-urban areas are governed properly, and it will not be sustainable. So what I would, based on my experience and then knowledge, what I would suggest is such robust development control regimes need to be put in place through policy documents, and permitting only risk-informed developments. I mean, that's very important. We don't even know the risks which are there. But I think in future, we need to get a better understanding of the risk that is there, and only risk-informed developments need to be promoted. And we need to have strong institutional structure to accommodate the nature of relationship that exists between urban areas and peri-urban areas. Mitigation initiatives, again, based on risk assessment, are extremely important. And then community and institutional capacity for preparedness need to be enhanced. And energy and water conservation is extremely important. We already know many cities like Chennai, and I was happy to see that we're going to listen to experience of Hyderabad. Chennai, many of the water bodies were converted into buildings, and then one of the reasons that we seeing quite often is flooding in Chennai. At least for the last 1 decade, we've been experiencing almost every second year. And Chennai is not alone. There are other countries in India, which is the thing. And we have a lot of knowledge that already exists, but this is not actually documented and disseminated to the people who need to know that. So that knowledge management is an important thing. And a strong monitoring mechanism using latest technologies. I would actually stop there, and then would be very happy to listen to experienced speakers, who I'm sure I just briefly glance through the topic they're going to do. And then I think most of these areas would be touched upon, but I would request them to stick to the 12-minute time given by the organizers, and then highlight some of the conclusions, and then what can be done so that we can put these things together, and then suggest some recommendations to that we need to follow. So it's as per the terms of reference given to me, I am also supposed to introduce the speakers, and then most of them are well known to me, and I'm also familiar with their work, so I feel confident. And so the first speaker is going to be Dr. Anil Gupta. Anil, I hope you are ready for it. And then Anil Gupta, he is the head of the division and coordinator for international cooperation, advisory services, and program director of the Center for Excellence on Climate Resilience at the National Institute of Disaster Management, which is a part of the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. And his topic today is going to be institutionalizing peri-urban resilience, an extremely important aspect that we need to pursue. Anil, I will pass it over to you, and then you have 12 minutes starting today, now, which is now 2:15.
Thank you, JP, and really good to see you, all the distinguished panelists of this session, and this wonderful a program organized by SPA with the partners. In fact, the topic that is assigned to me, institutionalizing peri-urban resilience, itself is a big question as on now. But yes, since it is a question, we all have to strive for finding out some answers to that. Certainly, it is going to take some time. But very first thing that comes to my mind when we talk about peri-urban systems in India. So peri-urban systems in general that we usually look at, for example, in European countries and other developed countries, and peri-urban systems in India, we find significant difference. So first thing that we should recognize the distinctions between the peri-urban systems from maybe from uh, place to place or country to country. In our country, if we look at the peri-urban systems, we find the boundaries are so much dynamic and even changing very, very fast every 5 years or certainly 10 years. So that is one thing. Second thing, when we look at the different tiers of cities, so different classification of cities, like we say tier 1, tier 2 cities. So leave aside metropolitan cities, their peri-urban systems, we find a different patterns as compared to other tier 1 cities. Other tier 1 cities, which are in a very, very large number in India now, I think more than 57. So there, the peri-urban development over the past 10 or 15 years has undergone a drastic change. Now these peri-urban systems are being utilized not only as a leftover land, but as an important resource, particularly for institutional development. We find that most of the new universities, colleges, new hospitals, the ecotourism sites, these are also coming in the peri-urban areas, alongside the waste management facilities, grain markets, labor markets, these kind of the conventional uses of the peri-urban systems. So when we look at the disaster resilience aspect for when we talk about the peri-urban systems, I think in between the recent experience that the COVID has given, so we should also not keep that experience aside, because that has brought some of the very, very particular issues to our recognition. One is that a huge population density living in, I would say that unmaintained habitat, like in COVID we seen, and then we realized the issues of migrant laborers or migrant population coming from various places, and these are a lot of these is unaccounted population. There has not been a proper census, because only a fraction of these are actually on regular roles of the job in some of the industries or some of the organizations. Rest many are totally unorganized. So that is very important issue. And there are three major aspects that I think we will need to consider. One is the hazard context, as in DRR, hazard, vulnerability, and these things are important. So when we talk of hazard context, I think the very important examples emerge from the cities like the Srinagar flood, that had the Srinagar flood, and the Guwahati flood. So here we see that how the environmental changes or the landscape changes in the peri-urban systems had affected the entire city or aggravated the hazards. So one is that the set of hazard context that we have to see. Then even if we look at the earthquake context, the Kathmandu, so initially that was recognized as an urban earthquake, but later it was recognized that the peripheral areas also got very significant damage. And that also gives us a context that when we talk about disasters, so when we have planning for a city, for example, we say that we need to integrate disaster risk management planning in the city development plans, and then comes to the village development plans. But what about these areas which are into transition? So these are important. And then the input-output matrix that we can draw between the rural systems and urban systems, I think that comes in between. So peri-urban, that serves very importantly, but seldom gets recognized. But equally important is, I think, the vulnerability context, because for the same level of hazard, the exposure of people are exposure to whatever infrastructure is there. Certainly the infrastructure strength and its infrastructure quality is very different in peri-urban systems. So for the same level of hazard, for example, heat wave, within the city, what kind of facilities people have, what kind of infrastructure exposure is there, what kind of infrastructure exposure is there in the peri-urban. So we'll have to see the exposure context, then ecosystem context. These ecosystems are sometimes the receiving end of the waste product and these kind of things, and then also assimilate the supportive capacity for the entire city. Urban agriculture is a new land use. I think we'll have to recognize that also. Because in the present land use context, the urban agriculture is not a recognized kind of land use. So that is also coming. Then ecotourism is a new thing, as I told. So the new things which we find an emerging trend in the peri-urban systems, how do we integrate into the planning regime? So one is that we have started talking about the watershed-based or landscape-based planning for our cities. So I think when it comes to watershed-based or landscape-based, so it also brings the context of the upstreams and downstreams also. So I think when it comes to that, there will be good opportunity to have linkages talking about the hydrological regime or drainage, and then this will be one window of opportunity. Then regional planning context, I recall that while I worked for the carrying capacity based planning for NCR region and Doon Valley region, that time we had tried to include these issues, that how city and city development and rural development will have cross linkages. So I think that approach where we talk about the carrying capacity based planning regime, so that also can give another window of opportunity. Third one is that in India, in fact, whenever we talk about disaster management planning, so we have all the tiers of planning, but district level planning and the city planning, these play a very important role. And at the district planning, now we see that all the districts have also been asked to develop their environmental action plans, and many of the districts in the country are also doing that. So that is a good opportunity to see that how the DM plans, disaster management plans, the district environment plans. Currently, the districts are also developing health adaptation plan. So health adaptation plan and other kind of plans, what kind of co-benefits and the synergy is there, and on that, how the city development plan will have like within the districts, which are the different tiers of cities. So their plans, and then looking at various kind of interlinkages. So as in the beginning, I told that still it is a question, but certainly there are certain windows of opportunities we can start looking at that, and then we can develop some kind of a regime where the peri-urban systems also get some planning benefits. So I would be closing my deliberation here with this remarks that we can take few case studies, and we have recently worked out some process documentation under some projects that we work with some of our partners. So those are available, and we have tried to work out that how this planning regime can have few replicable models for different type of peri-urban land uses. So thank you, and over to Chair. You are muted, GP.
Yeah, thank you, Anil, for that excellent, very crisp presentation. And then I'm very glad that you stuck to the time, and then very important points. especially the emerging concerns based on what we are studying and based on your studies, and then relevance of district and state level planning, and not just the disaster management planning, but the sectoral plans which need to look into this aspect of peri-urban area, and then definitely the importance to be given to planning. Now I invite the second speaker, who is Dr. Anand Meringandi. I hope I got it right, who is the Executive Director of the Hyderabad Urban Lab Foundation. And then he's going to speak about floods in Hyderabad, the peri-urban implication.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so over to you, Dr. Anand. 12 minutes.
Yeah. I'm going to share a screen. Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thanks to Mr. Anilji, who spoke just before me. I'm going to be building on some of the points that Mr. Anil made just before me. And my presentation is going to be a little bit jerky and jumpy. I'm going to be moving between different time periods, but I'm doing that with the understanding that some of the problems about some of the challenges of understanding the peri-urban have remained pretty much the same across time. The first part of what I'm going to be talking about is essentially to try and highlight this one single issue that I keep constantly thinking about, which is the issue of what exactly is the peri-urban. Is it a place? Is it a location? Is it a boundary that we can draw around a city? How long does it stay stable, and so on? And from what my predecessor said, it doesn't look like a very stable, durable location. It is something that seems to be constantly shifting. It's very dynamic. The land users there also keep changing every 10 years, not just in terms of land use changing, but land use categories themselves changing, because urban farming was not even a concept 20 years ago. So that means that if we're thinking about urban farming as a land use category now, the land use category itself is a new thing. So let me just quickly walk through what Hyderabad city was like, because this is where I do most of my work. The map that you're seeing here is a map of Hyderabad city as it began in Golconda Fort about 450 years ago. What happens when the city begins to get built is that the city basically moves.
Sorry for interruption. Can you move to slideshow mode? It's in window. Yeah, fine.
Does it work?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So what you see here is a river which has two branches at the eastern end. The first branch is called Musi, which is the main part of the river. The second branch, which is south of it, is called the Isa River, which is a smaller branch, but it has a larger catchment as in relationship to Hyderabad city. So when the city was actually built, they also built a freshwater reservoir north of the city, which is called Hussain Sani. Now, the thing that we must remember here is that this is a region which is part of the Deccan Plateau, where the drainage pattern is extremely chaotic, which means that the rain, when it falls, the precipitation can go in 100 different directions. And it's only in the last 1,000 years that people have figured out how to actually organize all of this into useful accumulation points that we can harness for our use, whether for agriculture or for other kinds of ecological purposes or for urban uses, right? So you see what happens as you move along time is that gradually the city begins to grow north and south of the river, and further north of the reservoir in the middle of the city, which is what is city now, is the British cantonment, right? By 1865, that this is the basic form that emerges. Now imagine what is the peri-urban here, right? The peri-urban is always the white space just outside of that gray area, and the land use there was constantly shifting through time. And as we come closer and closer to the 19th century, 20th century, these processes become much more intense, and gradually you see the city becoming what it is now, with something like a 10 million population. Now, what is the city? If at the base of it, even before we begin to think about land use pattern, what you see is a drainage system here, which was not man-made. It was something which was formed by the terrain of this land itself, which was then harnessed by all kinds of agricultural uses, which have essentially in the last 100 years begun to disappear. So 20 years, which is roughly the time, 5 to 10 to 20 years was what Anilji was talking about. This is your business district of Hyderabad city now, which is where we have we call it the financial district in the western side of the city. In 1990, you had hills, you had water bodies, you had some kind of farming, not very extensive, and a little bit of habitation in the area. But by 2003, the rocks and the boulders, they are flattened. You have the water bodies gradually disappearing. And as the water bodies disappear, as agricultural users disappear and more buildings come up, you have now a complete landscape which has no use for water at all, as it is served up by the terrain itself. This is where we are stuck. This is an image from the middle of the city. This is not somewhere on the edge of the city as of now, but 20 years ago, this was the urban fringe. This is an area called Sheikhpet, which is now again an extremely high density residential area, which was not the case 20 years ago. What you see here in the pink shade is all slums, 18 slums, which are on the hill slopes. And then you have the slope that comes on the left side of the map, with the satellite image, is a road which was created to create connectivity for a very affluent area called Filmnagar, right to the airport, which is further in the south, right? But until about 15 or 20 years ago, this was the area where there was agriculture, where there was grazing of small ruminants. There was a lot of just land that didn't do anything at all, apparently, but it did serve some kind of an ecological function. Now, this area is home to several gated communities, depending on the location. This is an area which is now home to a very large number of slums. Here is a map that you're seeing, drawing that you're seeing, which is the section drawing, which if you see on the right side, the drawing, you see the elevated buildings on the extreme right side and elevated buildings on the extreme left side. These are the high-end properties. And in the middle, you have the hill slope, which is occupied by the slums. And then you have the water body, which has essentially become the place that collects all of the sewage of this entire area, right? This area from 2002 onwards has been subjected to floods every year, until at some point of time we figured out a way of making an extremely harsh intervention whereby no water is at all reaching into the water body anymore now. All that you get is a little bit of sewage, and the remaining is completely diverted and taken away. And this is where the actual issue is. That is that what we are doing is the excess water that comes from the urban periphery is being harnessed and diverted in a way where we have to make very large infrastructural investments to prevent floods. If we cannot do that, and where we cannot do that, or where we are yet to do that, is where you have actually floods. This is just another image that I just want to put in to get a sense of what water and urbanization is like. This was at one point of time the edge of the city, the Musi River. and this was where all of the washermen used to be working. Gradually, over a period of time, we did a detailed mapping of the residences of washermen communities in Hyderabad. We found that they are all moving to places where, in this very uneven terrain, wherever there is water available, these guys are moving in and they're building their houses. In extremely vulnerable locations, they manage to somehow build their houses and live. And so long as the older system functions, this is fine, and they're able to live. But if the system breaks down at any point of time, then they actually have a very serious flooding problem. This is a text from the memoirs, an autobiography of Mokshagundam Visvesvaraya, which I thought was very revealing. He writes this about an interaction that he had in 1908, shortly after the 1908 September 28 cloudburst in Hyderabad, which killed hundreds of people and flooded the entire city. Mokshagundam Visvesvaraya is commissioned by the government to solve the problem of Hyderabad's flooding. And here is what he says: the river basin above the city abounded in small tanks, 788 tanks in a basin of 860 square miles. That is 1 tank per square kilometer of catchment. Valley of the Musi River, which caused this flood, consisted of 2 rainfall basins. One is the Musi and the other is the Isa. And from the levels marked by the flood, it was calculated the discharge began with 110,000 cusecs and rose to a maximum of 425,000 cusecs. In the valley of these 2 rivers, every tank of consequence gave away. In all, 221 tanks were reported to have breached, of which 182 were in EC and 39 were in Musi. Now, Visvesvaraya was commissioned at that time to do 3 things. One is to advise against the advise and assist in the reconstruction of Hyderabad city. 2, to frame proposals for future protection of the city from floods. And 3, to prepare a complete scheme of drainage for the city, including Kalarghat, which is near the river. So what did they do? Mr. Visvesvaraya then goes ahead and gives a scheme in which you have these 2 on the map. You see these 2 rivers that are joining here, right? So there are 2 flood balancing reservoirs built here, and the rest of the city, he creates a very complex system of drainage, which uses the connections between water bodies to drain off the excess water. So if you look at the elevation of the city, all of those brown areas are the high elevations and the green areas are the low elevation. So you have the Musi River running from west to east, and then the water is coming in from the north and the south. And this is a map that we made last year in 2020 when we had the big flood in the city, almost reminding us of the 1908 flood. Because we couldn't collect actual discharge data from places, what we did is to take the terrain map, and on that we plotted all of the places from where requests for flood relief came. And what we found was something very interesting. They were all in the immediate outflows of the water bodies that were there in each of these locations, which were all completely breached and broken. So what happens? This is actually the problem. You have, in this terrain, you have 2 water bodies at 2 different contour levels connected with the channel, and we have buildings coming up like this. This is where you have the flood. The problem is that we often imagine all of this to be a problem of encroachment, which is understood legally unauthorized construction on property that is not yours. And we keep imagining that the problem of peri-urban flooding is something that we can deal with by dealing with property problems, figuring out what is public property and what is private property. And we have never been able to solve it through that, because most of the people who have built in these places actually have documentation to show that the land belongs to them. How does this happen? It happens because in the Deccan, as I'm sure in many other places, you have a variety of revenue categories that don't actually fit into the neat liberal property regimes of our cities. The moment you turn land from something which is productive into something which is a matter of efficiency of services and other infrastructure distribution, you begin to erase older revenue categories of land. Here, you had a lot of categories of land which could not actually be used for any purpose other than lying fallow and waiting to be inundated at some point of time. That was the nature of this terrain. And what we have done is that those places which were used every now and then for marginal production work by different caste groups are now turned into real estate, and they are building on land that belongs to them. Very often the government itself begins to build in those institutional spaces that Mr. Anil was talking about a moment ago. All of those are actually ecological commons that should not be used for building in the way in which we have been building. And that's where the problem lies. So look at this. This is one municipality in the extreme south of the city, which is an area called Usman Nagar, and it's part of a municipality called Jalpalli. And I'll talk about that in a moment.
Dr. Anand, interesting presentation, highly interesting presentation. But I regret I'd like to tell you to conclude it in another 2 minutes. Otherwise,
I'm going to conclude in 2 minutes, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, so you have here another image of the same municipality. And then you have here a municipality that comes up in the north, which is called Kompally. Why do we have this kind of urban flooding in two municipalities which are outside of the city of the Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation? This happens because the area where we were not able to actually solve the problem of drainage in any meaningful way is the area where there are a lot of property relationships to be solved. And because those are things that will take time to get resolved, what we did in the last 10 years is to turn them into new municipalities which have to solve their own problems, right? So the thing that we really need to do now is to think about what kind of an institutional mechanism will be able to take this on as a problem which is not left for somebody else to solve at a local level. And maybe one of the ways to do this is to look at possibilities in institutions like the Metropolitan Planning Committee, District Planning Committee, something that is a multi-body institution and has the capacity and has also the political representation of people in it. Because if we don't have all three of them together, there's no way we can solve these problems. I'm done, sir.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I mean, so we know the mess that was created over a period of time in Hyderabad, and then why we continue to live in that setup. Thanks, Anand, for that excellent presentation. Now we move on to the next speaker, who is happened to be a friend of mine. We worked together for several years. Is Dr. Rohit Jigyasu. When he was in UNESCO Delhi, and we worked together. He's a project manager, Urban Heritage, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Program Unit. He works from Rome in Italy. And then his topic today is territorial approach for managing disaster risk and building resilience, learning from traditional knowledge. Extremely important. We stop learning from traditional knowledge. So Rohit, I'm glad that you're going to throw some light on how we can do it. Over to you. You have 12 minutes starting now.
Thank you very much, GP. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. A pleasure to see you and other friends here. So I'll just share my screen. It says that host has disabled screen sharing. So if I can have if I can do that. Yes. Okay. I think we are fine. Press. Okay. Great. So I also have a few slides to explain my key point of how we learn from traditional knowledge. Of course, I don't want to get into detail, but we all know what's climate change doing. It's not something that we need to now kind of guess. We already face number of floods and climate related other events have definitely increased exponentially. And we can see among other kind of hazards, how much are we impacted by the climate related hazards. So recent floods in Germany and Belgium definitely tell us like how things are going to shape up in the years to come. And of course, they are impacting our cities, and also mostly they are also having much stronger impact on the historic part of the cities where the infrastructure is a bit outdated, and maybe the density is sometimes much higher in many parts of the world. So of course there is also an issue where climate change is combining many other hazards together. So if we have for example, in this case, we have sea level rise, which is a much more longer phenomena, combined with cyclones, flooding, and then consequent fire as well. We are more and more facing these kind of complex crisis situations that we have to address when we deal with disaster risks. Now, the issue is that we can't deal with these issues of climate change in isolation. I mean, we do try to really look at them as a phenomena that's really impacting, but we forget that this is accompanied by urbanization, which is unprecedented and is really increasing. The number of people living in urban areas is much higher than those in the rural areas, and this trend is going to continue and is going to be exponentially higher as we go along. So we have to kind of understand what this is doing in terms of unregulated sprawl, resulting in the loss of landscapes and farmland, and which is affecting, of course, which is also posing risk on the to the livelihoods of a lot of people who are dependent on agriculture as a primary source of living. And of course, this is also affecting in many ways the local ecosystems or the traditional water systems. Just to give you an example, in Bangalore, if you look at the hydrology of the place, the way the water systems were linked to each other through canals and lakes, of course, the kind of urbanization that has happened in recent decades has completely destroyed that water system. And with the result that we have a lot of these lakes, but these become like cesspools. And if we actually try and understand and investigate, many of these lakes had very interesting traditional water system. And here you can see one of the remains of a dam, which used to control water flow. And of course, it is not working anymore because the connection with the canals is broken because there has been new development that has taken place, which kind of makes these structures redundant. And we also kind of get these kind of strange phenomena, as you might have been reading in the news last year, that some lake was on fire because of the sewage getting collected, and of course the gases that result in this kind of fire. Now, again, coming back to other sites or other cities where flooding is really seen, and I want to just bring the example from Ayutthaya, which is in Thailand, which is also on the World Heritage List. I mean, the flooding has been happening since 2011, and every year nearly there are these floods. But if you look at how Ayutthaya was planned traditionally, it was actually planned around these network of canals that were really laid out so that water would actually dissipate. Water would not just get accumulated in a place. And the entire way the city was planned or designed was around these canals. And of course, what is happening is that many of these canals have been built over, and you can see that the traditional, again, like in Bangalore, you can see here again, there was a traditional system of controlling the water flow, which of course is not working because the whole system has been broken down with the kind of developments that have taken place. And this is also kind of linked to the kind of houses that have been traditionally designed and how they are being replaced now with original stilt-based constructions, which kind of accepted the floods, are slowly being built over. And of course, they no longer allow water to kind of pass through them. And in that sense, many of these structures, and again, it's a result of high tourism and the need of people to build get the maximum livable space. And because of that, you face more and more issues of flooding. And then this phenomena, when combined with the impact of climate change, you see that the flood frequency also continues to increase. And we need to kind of understand that this is not a phenomenon that's a result only of the climate change, but it's a combination of factors which we are not kind of taking into account, and not building on the knowledge that has been gained over centuries by living with the environment. And then we also see many other traditional settlements, if we start to look at them, how they have been planned in relation to the local topography, with the due consideration of the orientation of these houses. For example, in the top left, you see Shirakawa village in Japan, where again, the whole settlement is kind of linking or is relying on the availability of the local natural material, which is used for building as well. And then the agricultural land around it is used to sustain the people. So there is a kind of a system that enables humans or communities to survive in a sustainable manner. And talking about peri-urban areas and the developments around the cities, it's also very interesting to see that many of the traditional settlements had a very interesting way of controlling the boundaries. And these boundaries were controlled, of course, through sometimes through rituals and through processions, because that will allow the boundary to kind of remain in a way. And then if they have expansion, they will actually not expand the settlement, but kind of choose another location rather than building without any consideration, and thereby creating challenges that I've been just discussing. So again, there are a lot of lessons that we can learn also how, of course, today we can't enforce those rituals and practices to kind of continue. Maybe some of them will disappear, but at least we can learn some of those principles behind them and how they have managed to kind of limit the settlements and this is one of the villages in Nepal, where it was very interesting that for centuries this village continued to have this kind of a limited boundary for the fact that there was a certain practice that controlled the growth of the village beyond. And in India, in Assam, if you look at Majuli Island, again, you find that there's indigenous knowledge of living with water, where you would accept the water to come in rather than resist the flooding. You will accept it, and your whole planning system was designed around it. So even the houses would be moving with the changes in the way water will come in, and you will also have these kind of walkways, which will then be again shifted according to the nature of flooding every year. So you would accept flood and you will plan around them. But that, of course, now with new developments completely not taking into account this kind of traditional planning, we end up with a lot more problems. And so the question that is critical is whether we need to fight or live with risks. And the knowledge is there also, not only in the way people plan or build, but also in the knowledge that have been kind of learned through experience over time, through sensory observations. And so this is in Gujarat, where again we found how farmers have been actually observing things over years, and that has made them create their own indicators. And that's how they have been kind of living. And the important thing for us is to not romanticize about them. I think it's not important that we keep on romanticizing, saying that this is the ideal system and we must follow it. What is the key is to take these into account and adapt them, innovate on them, and make them relevant to today's context. I think that's the key. And so what we have been advocating is how to address risks, because we work with cultural heritage sites, which can include historic urban areas as well. And we are emphasizing that in order to really do disaster risk management effectively, we need to have a place-based approach. which needs to look at sites in their wider social, economic, and geographical context. And that obviously also means that we need to look at cities and their connection with peri-urban and rural areas. And very importantly, in the cultural heritage sector, we have kind of not made the links with the natural sector. And tradition tells us that unless we link nature and culture together effectively, it's not going to really help us in reducing disaster risks. So we need to definitely adopt new approaches, tools, and methodologies that kind of base themselves on these learnings. So I'm just quickly ending my presentation by some of the initiatives that at ECROM we have been doing in partnership with UNESCO. So ECROM, the organization I belong to, is an intergovernmental organization, in fact, which was set up by UNESCO. And now we have been working on developing some of the tools and capacity building programs which are based on this place-based approach. Where we are trying to say that disaster risk management has to link people, nature, and culture. We also are firmly putting in place the fact that we cannot just look at vulnerability, but we have to look at the cultural resilience and ecosystem-based services. So it's just a way to say that we have been saying it for a long time, but vulnerability and capacities have to be looked at together. And there are a lot of capacities that are built in our traditional systems, whether cultural or natural or a combination. And of course, this pandemic has also made us realize that there is a link of how this kind of breaking up of these ecosystems is creating biohazards with which we are kind of becoming more and more vulnerable. So we are also including in this new manual that we are developing this issue of biohazards, and then linking climate change with disasters, not to see them as two separate things. Of course, there are things which are also very unique to climate change, but there is such a strong link between climate change and disasters that we need to kind of put them together, because institutionally they are separated. You know, in climate change belongs to environment sector, while disaster management comes under sometimes Ministry of Home Affairs. And it doesn't make sense when you see the kind of connection that is there between the two. And of course, enhancing the role of communities in disaster risk management and climate action is the key. So we have just developed a capacity building program where we have titled it as Understanding People, Nature, Culture, Heritage Management for Building Resilience of Living Traditional Settlements. Again, going with this approach. In fact, UNESCO for several years has been promoting an approach called historic urban landscape approach, which is again really talking about the landscape related context for planning of cities. Just concluding with this recent initiative that we have launched with UNDRR, they have launched series of guides on words into action, which is to translate Sendai framework into practical guidance for decision makers. And ICROM and UNDRR have joined hands to develop this guide on utilizing traditional knowledge for disaster risk reduction. So it's not about what the knowledge is, it is about giving guidance on how to use traditional knowledge for disaster risk reduction. So we are just in the process of finalizing it, and hopefully it will be published at the end of this year. We have also been conducting several webinars. This is one of the webinars we did last year, which is available on our website, www.ecrom.org. So if anyone is interested, there are very interesting case studies that you can go through in this webinar. So we continue to work in this area, and I think it's really, really important that we, and I emphasize again, we don't need to romanticize about traditional knowledge, but we definitely need to take it into account and see how this can be made relevant in today's context. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohit, for an excellent presentation. And you covered very good aspects about traditional knowledge and then how that is being replaced by other practices. And the place-based approach is something which I really liked. And then good, excellent. And then we are also happy to know the kind of work you are doing. I would definitely be interested in it, and then I'll go and then look at the website and then know more about it. Okay, now we move on to the next speaker, who I think is the last panelist in in the session. That is Dr. Rama Pandey, who is an assistant professor in the School of Planning in Bhopal, who has been showing a lot of interest in the field, especially on water resilience and then spatial planning. And then his her topic today is on water resilience and spatial planning. Rama, I don't have to tell you how much time you have, but I hope you will stick to that and then carry on. Over to you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The focus of my presentation is water resilience and spatial planning in peri-urban areas. The presentation is structured in 4 parts. First, I'll be giving a brief overview of water stress in Indian context, and then causes of water stress through case example, and then spatial approach and way forward. But more has been said about all these things by earlier speakers. All the 3 speakers had emphasized all these aspects, which I'm going to deliberate in my presentation. And Dr. Maranganti has very elaborately discussed and presented what I'm actually going to just say again. And this is just the overview of water stress, some facts, and which includes the inadequate water supply and groundwater depletion and infrastructure deficit, of water contamination, etc. But more importantly, I want to highlight over here is the international standards and Bureau of Indian standards have come up with the indicators for resilience to measure the performance of city. That way, the city through these indicators can assess where they are placed with respect to other cities. So this is the thing that has not yet highlighted by other speakers. Here we have been doing studies with our students, and some projects also we are doing, and over the time we have realized that these are the causes listed over here, like land use, land cover change, loss of vegetative cover, encroachment on drains, loss of lakes and other small water bodies, degradation of water quality, over extraction of groundwater, weak institutional and community resilience. So these were the causes of water stress. Through some 3 case examples, 1 from Jodhpur and 2 from Bhopal city, I would just like to showcase the causes of water stress, and all these studies are conducted with our student and part of our project. And this is the study that we had done for the city of Jodhpur under the project of building resilience of urban communities with European Union, and our study areas were city core as well as the 3 peri-urban areas, as you can see over here. One is I'll just focus on the peri-urban areas, and 1 was the industrial site, Basni area, and 2 villages were there, Jalmand and the Salavas village. Jalmand village is close to domestic waste disposal site, where they are disposing untreated domestic waste, and Salavas village is close to common effluent treatment plant, which is treating all the waste coming from this Basni industrial area, and the spillover is contaminating the groundwater. And here they are losing on their agriculture yield and opting for some other livelihood options, and as they can no more use this Jojri river water for irrigation and for other purposes. So the challenges we identified, this was the experiential study, and the larger part of the study to come up with the co-production through integrating tacit and explicit knowledge, as I was highlighted by Dr. Rohit also sometime back. So we also explored this in this case study, but that I'll not be highlighting over here today. So what we identified over here in these peri-urban areas of Jodhpur is the water scarcity, degraded surface water quality, groundwater contamination, leading to health implications, intermittent, though pipe water supply is there, but it was not very regular, especially in the month of summers, changing pattern of rainfall also we observed, and waterlogging due to this inadequate stormwater drainage system, lack of water management system, and water conservation practices. Also, unlike the other parts of Rajasthan, which are practicing these water conservation practices, and lack of community participation for such water conservation practices also in this peri-urban areas. So, the other case, two case study are from Bhopal. The one is highlighting the groundwater depletion problem, and the other case study is the catchment area of Upper Lake, which supplies drinking water to 30% of the population of Bhopal. How the catchment area is degrading, thereby affecting this service of the Upper Lake. So the case one, which is towards the southern side of Bhopal and showing the high urbanity index, as we can see that the more transformation has happened in this area. As we can see that from 1972 to 2006, the more built up has come up, around 258% transformation had happened in built up area. And then agricultural land also decreased by 45%. And then over here, what I'm trying to highlight is how over the period of time, the first order, second order drains got vanished, got encroached upon by the built up area, by this overlay. We can see this. And we can say that the urbanization changes the natural ecology of an area by altering its surface geography and ecology, as highlighted by other speakers also. It also affects the natural water cycle and supporting ecological systems, thereby adversely impacting the services provided by peri-urban ecosystem. Then the next, this is the Upper Lake of Bhopal, and its catchment area is around 361 square kilometer. So we conducted a field study of 15 villages in this catchment area. And this catchment area is regulated by multiple governing bodies. As part of it comes under the other district jurisdiction. So here also we found that the as in every city, every other city in India, land use, land cover changes over time, how the forest got lost, vegetation loss, and the agriculture, more and more agricultural land got converted to the built up area, and even the marshy land got converted into the agricultural land. So here we found during our primary survey that over extraction of groundwater was happening for irrigation purposes, excessive use of fertilizer they were using, and water quality degradation because of high quantity of nitrate, BOD, coliform, etc., and forest cover, loss of forest cover leading to soil erosion, and then sedimentation is happening in the catchment area. So these case studies highlight the various causes like groundwater depletion and the degradation of catchment area, and how the contamination of water due to this waste disposal, industrial effluent disposal. So how and the other causes have also been highlighted by the speakers earlier. So this is the one project that we did with the Environment Department of Government of Madhya Pradesh, and that was for the smart cities of Madhya Pradesh. But for the Bhopal smart city area-based development site, around 400 acres of site, we demonstrated ecological approach, how to go about it. So I just want to highlight that over here, one by one, the steps that we followed for coming up with the built form in this site. The site is very small, 400 hectare within the city, as was highlighted by Professor Anil also, how in the regional context, the drainage, studying drainage pattern is important. As was highlighted by Maringatti sir also. So how these we are neglecting these drainage pattern, and it's very important in the regional context to do the analysis and then place our site into that, whether it's a greenfield site or the brownfield site. One has to do the drainage analysis, drainage pattern analysis in a larger context. And then one has to do this is what we did over here, the physiography and landform analysis. What all are the water gathering slopes? What all are the water dispersing slopes? So one has to build it in the water dispersing slope, not in the water gathering slope. This is what has happened in the Hyderabad, as highlighted by him. So, and the geology, geomorphology is also important in building in any area. So here, then the water harvesting potential sites we identified over there, and then how one can channelize this rainwater to reduce runoff through this connected network of green spaces, how one can do the recharge pits in these areas, and designing of road to divert this rainwater to these green areas. Then how to develop a concept for this. So ensuring carbon neutrality is also important. So whatever green, we did conduct a survey on field and majorly girth of each and every tree, height of every tree and types of trees, and what is the carbon sequestration potential, and what all trees we can remove and what all trees are not to be removed over there. So after doing that, and then connecting all the places where all we can develop has the potential of collecting the rainwater. So we developed the green areas, connected it through the underground channels.
Rama,
so,
I would request you
yeah, just a last this thing. And then we decided, and what all build form should come, it has to be, again, have to link, one has to link it with the ecology. So this is how one should develop the concept, and one should not neglect the identity of the city in building up whatever build form these days people are building. So this is what I want to highlight. And this is the last slide where just I'm highlighting, I'm just saying what all has already been said, and a significant role of surface water bodies and study of landform for addressing water stress. Drainage pattern is important. Ecological restoration of degraded ecosystem, as well as in the case of Jodhpur, and the enlarged role of various stakeholders. This is the finding of our Jodhpur case study, how through in collaboration with various stakeholders, one can really do the changes. And then the robust institutional framework, again highlighted earlier, and then we have to have regulations together for land, water, and vegetation to be formulated in cohesion with each other. And one action plan for the city is with the statutory backing is also very important. For Bhopal, UN Habitat is also making a climate action plan. Then the government is also making, IFCO is also making with the Vasudha Foundation, and other people are also trying to make climate action plan for Bhopal district, and everybody is going to give it to the collector. So he will get confused. So all of us should sit together, and there should be only one action plan for one city or one district, so so that it can be taken forward by the implementation agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Rama, for that excellent presentation. And then thank you for sharing your findings of your case studies, both in Jodhpur and Bhopal. A lot of interesting points, but what I could gather is like the common things for these two cities. One is you have the degradation of the land, and then water quality going down very badly, and the forest cover vanishing, and then the built area, buildings and other physical structures are coming up on this land. And thank you for the set of recommendations which you made. Now we shift gears and then go into the next part of it, which is basically the discussion part of it. And then we have two eminent people. One is Animesh Kumar, who is heading the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction Office in Bonn, which is actually a global facility to handle climate action, disaster risk reduction, along with disaster data. And he is also involved in developing systems for monitoring of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and sustainable development goals. Having worked with the UN for more than 25 years, I can say that that's quite a bit. And then he has a very big challenge in front of him. I don't know how he's handling that, but all the best. Anyways, the second discussant is Dr. Janak Rajan. He's the president of South Asia Consortium for Interdisciplinary Water Resource Studies, based in Hyderabad. I don't think I've met Mr. Janak Rajan, but then from his bio, I understand he has a lot of experience working in water resource field. So I will now hand it over to Animation Janak Rajan, who would be handling the discussion part of it. I hope there are some questions already from the participants. I'm not too sure how this would be moderated or handled. Rema, you may like to give some light on that.
Dr. Animesh and Professor Janak Rajan has to take up the questions what participants they have put up in the chat box, and then they can take up from the what presenters had presented till now, and they can add to it. They are all both of them are very eminent expert in their field, in their area. They can add to whatever has already been said by all the four speakers. They can add value to it and take up questions and start the discussion.
Okay, and we have about 20 minutes for this, right?
Yeah, we have.
Okay, thanks. Over to you, Animation, then Dr. Janak Rajan.
So who is first? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Mr. Janak Rajan, maybe you can
No, please go on. Please go on. Yes, sorry.
No problem. No, thanks, GP. I was giving all ears to all the very interesting presentations. I don't see any question yet from the participant in the chat box, unless I'm looking at a different window. So what maybe I can do is to provide a few reflections on what has been discussed so far as the questions start coming in, and then I'll direct to the respective speakers.
Sure.
Yeah, the questions are coming in now. So let me maybe just try to kind of provide my initial reflections on what has been discussed. I must say that while the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was being endorsed a few years ago in 2015, together with a series of other international agreements in the same year, we try to move the narrative and the needle of the disaster risk reduction discussion from an event-centric management to a more process-centric management in terms of looking more at the risks rather than an event to manage. And one of the key things that we were looking at is what are the key drivers of risk so that we can address them rather than waiting for the drivers to convert into risk and risk into disaster and then trying to manage it. And rapid urbanization was identified as a key risk driver. In today's presentations itself, I've seen it was pointed at the outset itself about the challenges with rapid urbanization in developing countries. So it's pointed out that urban growth is happening in the developing world. I also would note that beyond the developing world, which is largely Asia Pacific and Africa, it's also happening within these countries in the small and medium cities rather than the larger cities. And peri-urban spaces of the small and medium-sized cities compared to the large and metropolitan cities are often more neglected as compared to in the metropolitan cities, where master plans often cover the peri-urban areas. There's also the issue of rapid infrastructure growth in terms of what was pointed out by Dr. Maringanti, I noted in terms of city waste and drainage management. happening at the same time together with urban sprawl in the city periphery. And I think all the speakers raised the issue of land use planning. I also noted the issue with data. So much is not known about the peri-urban areas in terms of what's happening, what we don't know about the unorganized sector, which I believe forms a big portion of the economies in the developing world, but also the less information we have on the vulnerability of these populations. In example, what Anil Gupta was saying about the populations on the move are often missed in the census. With these, some of my key reflections, and I also had some opportunities to offer, but before that, let me see what the questions which are present have been posed by the participants. So there's one question by Ms. Diksha Biswas, that the funds for disaster management is allocated at the district level. What will be the role of institutions at the block and local level related to disaster risk financing? And with respect to mitigation fund, which can be used for specific projects, what can be done with respect to resource allocation to peri-urban areas? I think, Dr. Rama, you talked about mitigation in your presentation in terms of carbon sequestration as well. So can you throw some light in terms of the mitigation fund? Maybe you can note down all these questions and then answer one by one. Dr. Anil, I think you are an expert in terms of local level disaster management. So maybe the funding issue at further sub-local level, as I may call it, how that can be handled. Then there's another question by Afia Siddiqui. Why do we mostly observe that urban flooding phenomena occurs in metropolitan cities like Delhi or Hyderabad? That's something which I think was touched upon by the first couple of presentations, including the presentation by Dr. Maringanti. So maybe from the Hyderabad empirical example, maybe you can take up that question. And then I think Carsten, interesting question. Second speaker, Dr. Maringanti, also talked about the commons. So how was it Dr. Anil Gupta, I think, talked about the commons. How can commons be effectively protected? So these are some of the initial set of questions. Maybe I will invite to now hand over to Professor Janak Rajan for his initial reflections while the speakers prepare to respond to the questions.
Thank you, Animesh. I think you have covered most part of it. In fact, my job is a bit reduced. And may also request you to go on, looking up the chat box and please divert the questions, because at the moment my facilities are a bit limited, so I won't be able to do that. Now, my job actually is supposed to pick up the thread from the panelists, and which I think is not very difficult given the subject. The subject is so interesting, and I picked up the thread. The thread is the following. One is actually to demystify the urban peri-urban space and the flood and urban resilience. That is a thread I wanted to see how it really goes. And the most important of it is to really understand the drivers of change. So to me, the drivers of change is, apart from the infrastructure building, it is growth and development. It's just not growth and development, it is a competitive growth that one is talking about. It's a competitive growth which drives really people mad, and that is what is really driving the governments to build the infrastructure. Okay, so that is actually the biggest issue, and that is the one which is most important for the urban expansion, which is really myopic and absolutely mindless and unplanned. Now, this is the context in which we need to also understand what is a flood. How do we understand a flood? I think that is something we need to address. We have been talking about, as if the flood is something which is, uncommon and it's a disaster and so on. For me, it is very important, first of all, to understand what is flood. How do you understand a flood? There is a difference between flood and inundation. In most of the urban areas and mega cities, what you see is inundation. It's not a flood. Flood is a flow concept. It is a flood. It's not a static concept. Whereas you see in most of the cities, inundation. Inundation is occurring because of hundreds of other reasons. It is not a flood in that sense. So hydrologically, what you call a flood is something which, after reaching the floodplains of the both sides of the river when the water flows. And even after the floodplains, when it goes beyond floodplains, then you call that a flood. But there is no way here, there is no such thing as a flood that's happening in mega cities. These are all inundations. So 99% of it is inundation, so it's not a flood in my view. So that's why it is very important for us to understand what is a flood. Secondly, you will know that earlier floods used to come and go, and periodically you will come across a flood. You'll be in a position to say that that there's going to be a flood this year, but today you can't, and the floods are not receding today. Floods stay, the water stays. That's why I call it an inundation. In fact, in Chennai, if you look at the characteristics of flood from 2005 onwards, 2005 was a big disastrous flood, 2015, and then 2021. The characteristics of the flood has changed drastically, completely, and it is caused the flood has become what you call the flood today has become much more localized. It is more localized, and it's caused mainly because of the clogging urban rivers, urban streams, macro drains, and so on. So that is something which we need to understand, record, and map. And thirdly, most importantly, we have to understand the rivers. I don't differentiate between urban river and rural river, but still, for the sake of understanding, I call them urban rivers. And we need to really understand the urban rivers, and most importantly, we need to understand the floodplains of the urban rivers and their catchments. It's completely disappearing. In fact, we have heard the examples of Hyderabad. We have heard examples of other cities, particularly Kerala and in Chennai. And Chennai has got three very important urban rivers. All the three urban rivers are completely encroached and shrunk and silted up, and the floodplains are encroached completely. So naturally, you will come across the floods both in urban and peri-urban area. So it is very important to really pick up that also. And then rivers have turned from full of no life to full of life to full of no life, completely because of the anthropogenic intervention. So they have reduced to the condition of a mere sewage carriers. So that is really causing a huge problem, not only because of that it causes a health hazards, but it contributes to very severe groundwater contamination. And then many speakers, all the four speakers have said that the missing water bodies. So the missing water bodies in the urban and the peri-urban area, it's important. Not only missing water bodies, and there are also missing links among them. All these water bodies used to be interlinked with a drainage system and very good inflow, outflow of water. Now all that is completely encroached, and these missing links and missing water bodies causes enormous flooding in the city. Now, I want to ask you one other very important question to all the four speakers. Can flood be an opportunity, or should flood be only a disaster? Why should you look at flood only a disaster? Because you will see, for instance, in Chennai, 2015 was declared as the flood of the century. The very next year, 2016 was declared the drought of the century. So why is that we are failing to save water when there is a huge flood? And then very next year, you will see there are thousands of water bodies around Chennai. All of them are remaining dry. There are 4,100 water bodies in the Chennai metropolitan area. They are dry in the very next year. Why? So that is why should flood be considered or viewed as an opportunity? And that is why I also would say that there is a need for an integrated approach of a flood and drought, and don't look at it separately. That's why I said, that's why I call flood an opportunity, not a disaster. And therefore, floods are only an invited disasters. In my view, I mean, if at all you call it a disaster, I would call it an invited disaster, because you're meddled with the system, you're meddled with the ecosystem, and so and then periodically you will come across droughts and floods, and then you complain about it. And I can cite any number of examples, in particular. Now, this is the situation in which I would like to also ask a very important issue and question, particularly to people coming from NDMA. Do you have differential risks and vulnerability analysis? You talk about risks and vulnerability analysis, but what you need is the differential risks and vulnerabilities. It can't be a homogeneous concept. The risks and vulnerabilities are completely heterogeneous, differs from one section, one community, one settlement to another. Secondly, we need to understand realistically the potentials and the limits to adaptation. Adaptation is not a very generic. You can't say that adaptation is for everybody. No, there are potentials. What are the potentials of adaptation? Understand realistically, and there are also limits to adaptation. And in the same way, I would also say the degree of resilience is also differential. It's not homogeneous. You can't say that resilience is the same for everybody. No, you build resilience according to the type of community that you are investigating, the type of communities and the problem that you are addressing, and so on. For instance, the people who live on the coast and the fisher folks, their degree of resilience is different from someone who lives other side. And lastly, the disaster management, mitigation, adaptation, building resilience should be evolved with respect to benchmark. Do we have the benchmark in this country today? We don't. But then you talk about the adaptation, you talk about resilience, you talk about mitigation. But with respect to what? What is the kind of benchmark do we have? We don't have the benchmark. We don't have any kind of a scientific database. But then we talk about everything, including mainstreaming all these adaptation resilience strategies into the urban planning. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Janakarajan. So maybe I think we have overshot the time a bit. So while addressing the questions, maybe the best bet would be that each of the speaker takes the floor for a minute. And then kind of while responding to the question, presents your kind of closing reflections so that we can end the session. So maybe we can start with Professor Anil Gupta.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Animesh and Dr. Janakarajan. In fact, just quick reflection on the points that have been raised. One is regarding the mitigation fund, and second is local level disaster resilience. So, as at the district level, basically we have the funds flow from the state planning, state level planning under various sectors. Then sectors are the sectoral budget is then subdivided into the departmental budgets. Why I'm talking about the departmental budget, because in Government of India, we have in India we have a provision of flexi fund. So a definite percentage of each budget, each project budget can be spent on disaster risk reduction related activities. So 10% is a standard mark of any budget. So that will amount to a huge money. So there is no deficit. Besides that, the dedicated fund, there are two dedicated funds. Earlier we had National Disaster Response Fund and State Disaster Response Fund. Those have been recently renamed. So those are now called as National Disaster Response and Mitigation Fund, and similarly State Disaster Response and Mitigation Fund. So now mitigation is added. So the difference it has made, that earlier the money was only permitted to be used during disasters only for response and early relief kind of activities. But now we can use this money for capacity building, and for example, we need to have some kind of procurement and some kind of construction related activities, planning related activities that can help in building resilience. So that is this modification is leveraging for. And beside this, there are other funding mechanisms which can say that the lateral approaches. For example, any interventions for climate change adaptation. So under the NAPCC, National Action Plan on Climate Change, now we have a state action plan. All the states have got their SAPCC. So under SAPCC also, whatever budget is allocated, so we also have to look. And in fact, some of the places we have seen that practically it has been done, that we are looking for synergy between the two, climate change adaptation and DRR. And there are certain interventions which can be common to both, which can provide disaster resilience as well as adaptation to climate change. So there also that kind of a common funding is being used. For example, now we are going to launch a major pilot project in the country for 3 states, Himachal, Gujarat and Orissa. under the National Adaptation Fund. So in principle, the fund is for climate change adaptation, but we are going to utilize it for disaster risk reduction, because we are going to develop demonstration sites for disaster resilient buildings. So certainly we'll be looking at climate resilient disasters, climate related disasters. So that is one thing. And the last point that I would add, that we are also working to utilize the flagship program. For example, how Manrega, which is the one of the biggest national flagship scheme of Government of India. So how Manrega can be used for local development of disaster resilience. So whatever interventions are done for promoting employment, if we can get some earthwork done that can help disaster resilience or disaster proofing of the sites. So that we are doing. In fact, in Kerala, this has been already piloted, and in Kerala it has been piloted for the urban Manrega. So that is also even an important example. So these are the quick reflections and my final contributions.
Thank you, Dr. Anil. Let me pass over quickly to Dr. Anant Maringanti. Thanks for already responding to Karsten's question in the chat box. So maybe you can take a minute to provide your closing reflections.
Yeah, I actually wanted to very quickly respond to the earlier question, which is about why do these things happen in large metropolises, and use it also to offer a very broad reflection. I think these things happen in large metropolises basically because we are looking at multiple catchments, basins, watersheds, whatever you want to call them. They're all nested systems, and they're not simple systems like in one single small town. And it is this nested systems which are very large, interconnected. I mean, Hyderabad, for example, is sitting on two river basins, Godavari and Krishna. And that's a very large system. And within that, there are multiple subsystems. And each of these subsystems is then getting pretty badly mangled because of all the new construction that's happening. Now, to deal with this, our problem really is that you have some government departments, line departments, which understand watershed, or if you want to call it an ecological framework of governance, which is the irrigation department or the forest department. But you have other government departments which don't have the capacity to do that. And I think that in general, what happens is that we don't have a system of accountability. We don't have systems of practices which are going all the way down to the bottom onto the field, where we can ensure that things don't pile up to a point where it becomes a major crisis. The result, what's happening is most of the time, one other word that I want to add to what Professor Janakarajan has just said, which is that this is inundation. This is actually a lot of micro level local floods that we are seeing. That's what urban floods are often about, which is the reason why you can't predict them too far ahead. You by the time you understand what is the precipitation, where is the precipitation happening, the damage is already done, right? So we don't have the luxury that we have with large rivers, where you can say that upstream there is rainfall, precipitation, so we have 8 hours time to deal with it in somewhere downstream. We don't have that luxury in the city. It happens in the next 1 hour. So therefore, the only opportunity we have, only hope we have, is to build the institutions which have the capacity to do this. And I think that we need to find the legal framework within which those things can be built. Otherwise, we are looking at a pretty bad situation. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Anant. And then finally, I understand Rohit has to leave because of another meeting. So Dr. Rama, over to you.
I would just take it forward what Dr. Maringanti has said about the urban flooding. It's very localized flooding. We actually can't predict it. But I think that the waste management is also responsible for it. Our whatever little bit drains we have in our cities are all choked up with the waste disposal. Still, despite having the Swachh Bharat scheme, we can see in our cities when we go to the field, as in the case of Jodhpur, where we had gone, all the canal system in the core city area, which used to bring water from the lake to these traditional water bodies in the core city, all those canals were blocked with the waste dry waste. All the waste was dumped into all these canals, and there was no way of bringing water through these canals. When we spoke to the people over there, they say that yeah, they like to throw, like whenever this municipal corporation vehicle goes away, and after that only they dump their waste outside their house. Means it's we need to bring the behavioral changes in the people. That is what is lacking in India, and it will take time to make these changes, be it transitioning to the public transport system from a private vehicle to public vehicles, or waste disposal or segregation of waste. Here, I would like to highlight the case of Indore. Indore is doing very good in terms of all these things. Yeah, they have this this carbon credit system also. They are monetizing whatever they are doing, small projects in their city. They are also converting this thing, bringing the people together, and we can see the behavioral changes in people of Indore, how they are managing their waste, and all this liquid waste is also getting treated in Indore. They have achieved the 100% treatment in their city, and the CEO of Smart City had a discussion with the industrial lobby for converting this diesel boilers to the CNG piped CNG system. And after having many meetings with the industrialists, they are now going for this CNG for industrial boilers. So this is how they are taking these small initiatives. So one should learn from the what the Indore is doing. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Rama. So I think let me hand over to GP. But just before that, something which I wanted to point in terms of the challenges that we have had, but I also wanted to point some very quick opportunities that the peri-urban areas follow. And I started at my outset, I mentioned that the rapid urbanization is a big risk driver, but I also feel that the answer to many of the city challenges lies in its periphery. And we need to start moving the discussion from the drivers of risk to drivers of resilience. One of the key things and three areas of opportunity I see, one is in terms of, has been pointed out in terms of urban ecosystem and nature-based solution, urban watershed management as upcoming field, but also infrastructure resilience. I'm sure had Kamal Kishore been here today, he would have talked about it, with trillions of dollars being invested into infrastructure, but at the same time, we are losing around $400 billion because of infrastructure losses, because of disasters. It only makes sense that we make risk assessments as the basis for any infrastructure growth and not keeping the peri-urban parts out of this ambit. And finally, data. Mention about it, that how much we don't know about the peri-urban areas. And before coming to this meeting, I just checked into our own initiative, which has been running for the last over 10 years, called Making Cities Resilient. Now, 4,500 cities have joined this initiative, and thousands of them have actually measured their level of resilience using a scorecard that we had developed years ago. And I found that out of 154 indicators which are there to measure a scorecard to level of resilience, peri-urban area or peri-urban resilience is not mentioned as an indicator. So I take upon myself as this task to follow up on this area of work within the organization to ensure that peri-urban areas are very prominently reflected in our city resilience measurements, and also ensuring that the right information is there to inform urban policies. With these, I hand over to GP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Animesh. Excellent moderation. And then thanks for all that valid points. First of all, I want to thank all the speakers, starting with Anil, and then Anand, and Rema, and then Rohit. Rohit, of course, is left, but I will catch hold of him separately. And I also want to thank Professor Janak Rajan and Animesh for that discussions. A lot of points were raised. I won't really even attempt to list down all that one, because we've already short time by about 12 minutes or 15 minutes. But what came through in the entire discussion, or some of the points which I could gather, was one is there is strong recommendation to have a robust institutional structure. which sort of pulls together various sectoral actors together and then provide the required coordination to make sure the relationship that exists and then that would come in the future are being managed without compromising on the sustainability. That came through from most of the speakers. Then there was also this recommendation to provide the importance of sectoral planning, starting from the first the Anil, they mentioned about the need for sectoral planning, the multi-sectoral planning. So it's not just one disaster management plan or one some district management plan or whatever it is, but then we need to have this multi-sectoral planning process to be robust. Rohit also mentioned about the concept of space, like you consider the whole space, which otherwise could be the region, and then look at various aspects within that to take it forward. Of course, case studies also pointed out that the degrading land and then the water shortage and the quality of water and then the adequacy of water and then the green cover being destroyed for other development purposes. So we need to look at that. I would be happy to work with SPA in case it's required to come up with some recommendations and then polish it out if they give me a draft. I won't charge anything. I am not looking for a job or anything of that sort, and it can be voluntary. And with that, I want to thank all the participants for staying back and then raising some questions. Over to Rama in case for the final word from the organizers' point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for moderating the session so well. And you can always wait from 4 o'clock. We have the closing session where we'll be having the policy deliberations. So you can participate in that session. Also, whoever is interested from the, I would request Dr. Animesh also, though I don't know how he will manage his time, but if he can contribute in our this deliberation and policy deliberation in the closing session, we would be very happy for you to be there. And similarly, Professor Marin Ganti also, if you would like to contribute, and Professor Janak Rajan also, I would invite all of you and Dr. Anil Gupta also in our this closing session where we'll have deliberations on policies and all the 4 sessions that we had. So in the mural, we will be just discussing on whatever deliberations we had from the other 3 sessions also, and how we can take it forward as a policy document. So all the participants and all the speakers, I would like to thank you. And I would like to thank you, Padmanabhanji, also for agreeing to chair this session at the very last moment. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, I'll see you there in the closing session after a few minutes. Thank you. Thank you for being here and taking out time.